If we were to design education from the ground up today, it would not be as it sits because AI is here.
The core barrier to scaling is not infrastructure, regulation, or talent. It's learning. Most Gen AI systems do not retain feedback. A lot of times it's the smaller businesses that are the kind of the laggard responders. And so if there's an issue in the economy that's affecting small business,
214,000 new jobs, and then 45, 60 days later, revised down to 16,000. I think I saw on Redfin 519,000 more sellers than buyers. So it is certainly a buyer's market. Episode 56 of Market Moves with Mark and Jeff. Two uninteresting guys talking about interesting times. Jeff, it's good to be back with you today. It seems like we are all distracted with a lot of exciting things. Kids back to school, college football starting this year or this weekend in earnest, and just even mortgage applications are a tick up. Good things are happening and people are busy. What's going on in your world?
yeah, I think that probably sums it up. You get out of this summer mode, at least for those that have kids, and back into the structure of kids having to go to bed early and get up early and go to school and everything. And there's just a lot of stuff. It's kind of a fun time of year with transitions and stuff, but certainly getting back into routines helps. My fear is that people might be getting back into a routine and exiting, listening to you and I talk about who knows what as often. I'm hoping that can become part of somebody's integrated routine as we come into the fall months, but time will tell as to whether these two uninteresting guys are worth listening to or not, Mark.
Well, a week or two ago, I was on my first college campus tour with my daughter. Have a few more scheduled, and then the young kids are back at school, and it's quiet around the house for a moment here each week, and that's been nice. But we're kind of sad for the summer to end. This has been a good one. My boys 6 and 9 years old played pretty well together and had a good time. So I'm sort of sad to see it end.
It comes, as I was thinking about this just the other day, it's like by the time school is over, you're ready to have a break and to usher in summer and, just the fun stuff that you do and whatever. By the time summer's about done, it's nice to get back to some structure and some organization that is lacking. But I'm with you too. I mean, it's one of those things where you definitely miss some of the availability of the kids being around and just things that you go do during the summer that don't work out as well as school starts. But with that comes their activities and stuff you get to support them in. I've got a daughter who plays in the pep band at the school, so it gives me an excuse to go watch some high school football and cheer for her. And they're just fun memories, whatever your kids are doing. I've got one boy who's not really done sports, but worked consistently, and it's just fun to see them get engaged with something that it helps them commit to and have to show up and be part of a team. We've got a mutual coworker who said she required that her boys do something, whether it was sports or a job or something during high school, because they just had to learn the value and the importance of being relied on, having to show up, perform well, and carry your weight. And you just learn important life lessons, going through that process, whether it's a member of a team, working on a staff at an employment somewhere. It's just good lessons that are hard to replicate solely from mom and dad.
Jeff, this leads me down a path maybe a little bit out of order. I think first, just to show agenda, friend of the pod, Frank Luco, has led us down a study of the Bureau of Labor Statistics that we'll be talking about on the show. Maybe we happen to be more interesting than the topic today, but I think it's really good to know where this jobs number comes from. It's been making the headlines, so we'll get into that. But as we're talking about kids going back to school, I've had a couple of things, experiences, or I guess they're experiences that are on my mind, especially around this artificial intelligence stuff. I was on this college campus tour. It's a real nice college, probably much nicer than my daughter will end up going to, frankly. But it was interesting to tour and asking the question of how the school itself is handling artificial intelligence within the curriculum or even an overarching philosophy. And almost like there wasn't one at all. The answers were basically that each individual teacher in their syllabus is, free to do anything, and they do anything across the spectrum, from not allowed to use it at all to you must use it, write every paper through this first and then edit or whatever. And so, but really left wide open and left to be excluded from education entirely. And I did wonder to myself kind of quietly, is this a in denial response because AI is going to shift, however we educate ourselves as a society so much, and just not wanting to tackle it yet? I don't know. I was surprised that, and I imagine when I go on more tours here, I'm going to get kind of the same answer, because artificial intelligence, as we've talked about a little bit on this podcast, is pretty disruptive in terms of how people learn. And I've got another thing that I'll tell you about, but first I'll pause. Any thoughts on that college tour and AI involved in it?
Well, I do love it when you get on a roll, Mark. I was happy to let you keep rolling. Well, one question comes to mind out of that. So did they have any sense of how many of the professors, understanding that they kind of, are left to their own devices in a sense to create the syllabus? Do they have any sense as to whether it was an emerging trend, or are more of the instructors or professors leveraging and requiring its use, or are most prohibiting it? Did you get any sense of like what the overall appetite was for having it involved in the curriculum?
I didn't have there was a lot of people around as I was asking these questions. I didn't go through a number of follow-ups, but my sense is that in most colleges, it is a professor that is at least halfway through their career, and not, new upstarts, and that they would tend to lean towards more traditional perspectives and approaches, and that the more than average would say, hey, keep that scary thing that is ruining the world out of sight. And I don't know, it's interesting. It's a total guess, but that is my read.
No, that makes sense. I maybe we can send you on tour to query some of these colleges and professors specifically about the overall, kind of appetite, desire, approach, and mentality on the use of AI. I think you're right, though. I think, and it's like it's human nature, right? I mean, if I'm halfway into a career doing things a certain way, it's not that easy, and most are not going to pivot 180 degrees to fully embracing a technology. It seems like, from the college's perspective, you almost have to have an intentional desire to go hire those that are going to lead with an AI, I don't know, maybe first, or at least an AI prioritized agenda in the way that they teach. It's interesting. I've seen several kind of talks given recently. I'm a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. They've got some leadership there that's talked about AI specifically, which is kind of interesting, like having religious leaders like just talking about this emerging trend. But one of the things I think that I've heard discussed recently falls in line with what we talked about with Roy Meyer, with what you're talking about, is AI as a tool. I mean, it's not something that you should be afraid of, refuse to use or learn or integrate with, but there are like potential pitfalls or downfalls. And some of those are, if it becomes the crutch that replaces my analytical thinking or my ability to learn and internalize things, that's probably a negative outcome. If I learn how to use it to sharpen those, those skills of reasoning and kind of questioning initial results and stuff, I think it can be used to sharpen and make you, even better educated and well-rounded. And so, like, from religious leaders, I hear them saying kind of the same thing. Like, you can't replace your like commitment to doing things, that you should be doing to make you better as a person. And I think in college, I think in business, it all comes down to, if our approach with AI is to let it give me the answers and just stop there, it kind of stunts our development and growth. If we use it to, like we talked last week, if we use it to amplify intelligence as opposed to augment or replace it, then I think that that's probably the optimal outcome. And so it's interesting to see what the kind of feeling on the ground is at the initial college campus. I'll welcome some of your other feedback as you visit others.
And I haven't done this myself, but I've seen several talk about these language models as being like an exponential step forward in religious studies. In someone being able to digest multiple translations and versions of quotes, and how do other similar religions view this sort of thing. And so it's just this data amplification that comes through and makes a really confusing topic where it's almost impossible to aggregate the whole perspective, that or all the different perspectives that are out there. I've seen that, and it reminds me of something we talked about early on in Market Moves, was a West Coast university, and maybe even a computer science department, that was suggesting that for the first 2 years, their computer science majors would not touch AI as part of the curriculum, and then dive in, learn to do it the old-fashioned way, before you move in. And I don't know, it's just really interesting stuff. And I've got a podcast that I'm going to share with you, Jeff, that I haven't listened to yet, but put it on our sheet here. And it's a billionaire successful type. First name's Joe. I don't even know what his last name is, but he started a school called Alpha School, and a premise of testing in the top 1% nationally by spending 2 hours a day through this. And I think the whole basis of it is, I am certain of this, that if we were to design education from the ground up today, it would not be as it sits, because AI is here. I'm certain of it. I don't know fully how at this point, but it's such a good teacher. You can tell these language models to teach you in the grade that you want to be taught in, I mean, it's nonstop. So really cool stuff coming there. But and I've thought this with my boys who are full of energy, and the typical boys, and having to sit in a classroom for 6 of 8 hours a day or whatever it is, if the same thing could be accomplished in 2 hours. Maybe I'm turning into a homeschooler, Jeff. I don't know.
Well, I won't criticize you too much if you do, Mark. I mean, that is one of the cool things, though, is there's different approaches, at least on the education side, that fit different personalities. I've got one boy who's going to like a career tech school. It's a good fit for him. Wasn't for some of our other kids. I think AI can facilitate even more customized learning, exactly as you're talking about, as long as we're willing to embrace it. There's an investor who's backing that Alpha School. I listened to something recently. I'll be excited to listen to the podcast. I don't think I've listened to the one that you're probably have in mind, but I have heard a little bit about the emergence of this school and this concept of kind of an AI first approach to education. And of course, there are potential pitfalls or things to be aware of, but in this technology world that we're living in and where it's evolving to, it sure makes a lot of sense to embrace where things are going, as opposed to totally resist it. I think you see that same principle apply in business. I mean, we're living that in the appraisal space. Changes are here, not just from technology, but the way we write reports. And you can resist it, you can embrace it, but it comes and evolves whether you like it or not. So I think you and I both look at it and say you may as well adapt and survive, as opposed to not adapt and die.
Yeah, Jeff, and while we're on this topic of AI, something you and I kind of like to chat about frequently here on the podcast, we did have this MIT analysis that I just wanted to reference here, which was an analysis of some 30 artificial intelligence deployments worth $40 billion. And the basically the analysis is suggesting that 95% of those 300 initiatives have yielded no measurable ROI, return on investment, as of today. I think this is notable on many levels, and especially as you and I are exploring where to implement, how quickly is it here, what are we missing out on, any of us, any of the market moves ethos, what are we collectively missing out on if we aren't employing something right now? All those sorts of things are questions that how can you not have, because there's this fear of loss, and there's all this hype being built up all the way around. And this was a surprising result to me. Any thoughts coming from it?
I don't know that I was as surprised by it in the sense that we see it's the hype, it's the buzz. It actually kind of sparks a connection, I think, to Jeff Bezos' history. He saw this rapid adoption of internet, presence and just like online users, and said, "Hey, I got to figure out some way to ride this wave." And so he starts an online bookstore, basically with the vision of it becoming an online everything store. But went through a period where, like very questionable as to whether they were going to survive, being accused of I think, like the reporters were calling them Amazon.bust for a while during this .com, cycle, where there was exuberance, and then it fell off, and then it gradually became like what we know today as far as e-commerce and just, like the internet that we live in today. And it feels like AI is following that similar kind of tech trend where you get this initial, it bursts onto the scene, there's all this wild imagination as to what can happen. And then reality sets in that it doesn't immediately lead to immense productivity for every employee in every firm. In fact, a lot of the investment, as this MIT study is finding, isn't yet resulting in any measurable return on investment. I don't think that means that when you look up in 5 and 10 years from now, that's still going to be the narrative. I think that it will get there, but it just doesn't happen, on the very front end of this new technology hitting the market. And so it maybe doesn't surprise me as much, Mark, if I try to look at it from a little bit more of a historical context of the last time there was a real significant technology disruption in the world. I think AI is and will continue to follow that similar trend and trajectory.
Jeff, I love this chart, and it's next up on the slides. I just added as you were talking here, but we are. This is. I think it's like a innovative cycle or a disruptive cycle. You may have to refresh.
Give me just one sec.
Yeah, sure, but it is this. I'll talk about it here, and we need to do that for the sheer audio listeners anyway. But is the innovation trigger with a sharp peak upwards to the peak of inflated expectations that then sharply goes down to the trough of disillusionment. And this is one of my two favorite phrases here, that we may be on some level in the trough of disillusionment now, but soon gets on to a more reasonable slope of enlightenment and then the plateau of productivity. And so I think, what you're describing, what we're talking about here is, we're probably reaching that trough of disillusionment on some, hey, this is going to be easy. Everybody's going to use it within 6 months time. And, it's not that simple. And I think we're going through that right now. And, I don't think anybody is disillusioned that this isn't going to be a real thing. Of course, it's just how quickly should business owners or practitioners install these things in their operations, or even measuring when is the right time to jump in. And so I think this describes that well, what we're going through. And what's interesting in this MIT study, at least reading the kind of bombastic headlines and then reading down through, it is not a conclusion that the technology can't make this stuff happen. It is the implementers that are really struggling to make it happen. It's the enterprise companies that have big plans and then just kind of get hung up, maybe for a whole lot of reasons. And so I think that's really interesting, Jeff, that the disillusionment right now is really not the tech. I mean, I think there's a little bit of the error rates and the hallucinations, and but really what that should spur is the next phase of measurable checks and balances that these things need to have to really be operable.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And I totally agree with your assessment. I don't think the trough of disillusionment is that, hey, this AI sucks and nobody's going to use it. It's still receiving, really broad-based adoption. In fact, you and I were talking about, ways that people are adopting it in their personal lives that aren't yet really showing up in a business productivity perspective yet. And so I think the disillusionment is more that it's not resulting in significant return on investment, from a business and an investment standpoint. But it's certainly broad-based adoption. the like you, I like the phrasing of the trough of disillusionment. I can't help but think of Michael Scott talking about the stages of depression and like coming over that, and I trying to find clips on the fly is probably not one of our strong suits, so I don't have one to play. But his line is basically, well, I'm trying to get them through the stages of grief, and if I can just get them depressed, then I will have done my job today. Is basically his line, and it feels like, you know, sometimes we're living in this moment, like, well, crap, I thought AI's been here for a few years. I thought it was going to lead to wild abundance and everybody being way more productive and profitable, and business profits aren't necessarily there in most industries, as this report is showing. I think it'll come. I think it's probably inevitable. I think it's not going to be here as quickly as people were initially projecting, Mark.
Yeah, I totally agree. Totally agree. It's fascinating to watch. And in one keynote that I saw here is that while I think they called it the shadow AI divide or something like this, but saying while the enterprises are really struggling to implement AI solutions within their big universes, enormous success is taking place with the individual user picking up and optimizing their own job with artificial intelligence, and specifically large language models, whether that be a coder or whether that be a series of automated or formerly manual tasks that have been automated one way or another. But you know, it would explain why we're seeing such an enormous amount of subscribership to folks like ChatGPT and that sort of thing, that the individual is really succeeding and outpacing the enterprises in implementing artificial intelligence solutions.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And we'll have to see if we can find a link to the full article. And in full disclosure, I haven't read through the full report, but look forward to it. I think it'll be very interesting. One of the interesting, you know, like summaries or takeaways that was cited there, it says the core barrier to scaling is not infrastructure, regulation, or talent. It's learning. Most Gen AI systems do not retain feedback, adapt to concept or context, or improve over time. And so just interesting to see some of the roadblocks to implementing this at the company or system-wide level, where you run into far fewer of those issues when it's implemented on the individual level with just aid in doing their particular job. So I think, you know, what you're saying is definitely aligned with some of these key takeaways from the report.
You know, those with the dollars to invest in artificial intelligence are going to be the biggest winners of the last several decades, right? They have the R&D dollars to go in and try and be the first to market and really put some financial might into solutions. But you know, these folks are also the ones that are not the disruptors. They are typically the disrupted, you know, and so for them to be introducing, I think it would make sense that some of their pilot projects are lagging in scale up. This is not what they do. You know, they did to reach where they were several decades ago, but now it's marginal improvements to lift stock prices and not take too big of risks and that sort of thing. And so, you know, I wonder, Jeff, if a little bit of the lack of success is this is sort of disruptive tech, and it brings me to the story this week, and I'm sorry in advance for the weekly Elon Musk update. They're all especially for those that don't care for him, but I saw him announcing a job posting for a kind of a new division within their XAI framework called Micro Hard, which is the exact opposite of Macro Hard. I think it is the exact opposite of Microsoft, and the goal is to just rewrite it using people but AI at the base. And I imagine that. Well, it's probably not that, but whatever these, new designs, I think to recreate a lot of these large companies is certainly easier today than it was 5 years ago. And then those folks will probably be built to be able to implement a lot of AI.
Yeah, no doubt. It's just so hard to turn a large ship. It's much harder to do that than to build something that's pointed in the direction that you want. And you just have this, kind of company inertia that makes it hard to fully adopt and implement like an AI solution. We talk about with education. I think it just applies in so many things where you have an existing way of operating. It's really hard to change course. It's almost easier to start something from the ground up than it is to totally redesign something that already exists.
You bet. You bet. Well, Jeff, if you are good with it, we will shift gears to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. We talk about this, talking about housing throughout the U.S. and the broader economy and how this affects interest rates. And you and I have struggled with the reality of the revisions of these job rates or job postings, job reports, and in trying to use those to predict what's going to happen in the market or really even assess what's going on in the economy. And we see these enormous revisions. This has been since we recorded in the Biden administration. This is no president specific. It's been around like this for a long time. And on the heels of this, we had enormous revisions recently, 3 or 4 weeks ago. And on August 1st, Trump fired the head of the Bureau of Labor Statistics, Erica McIntyre, I think, if I've got that right, and has recommended a new someone to replace them, last name Antoni. But it's really caused you and I to say, hey, what's going on? How are these jobs reports compiled? Why on earth are they getting revised so much? And just sort of understand the process one way or another. What do you know?
Yeah, you bet. Well, first of all, thank you, friend of the pod, Frank, for sending us some reference material here. I think, it's been kind of fun to dive into a little bit how the process works, what it is they're measuring, and how it's even being done. Trump was alleging tampering or rigging of the numbers, even pre-election to try to bolster the prior administration, and now that he's in place. And as we've done a deeper dive, at least, I don't know how likely that really is. Maybe that's exactly what's happened, but to try to understand, okay, so how do these numbers work? Where do they even come from? How are they collected? Why do they get revised? It was kind of fun to dive into, Mark. And so, in a nutshell, if I can summarize it effectively, some of the information that came out of an interview from a former, I believe, commissioner of the Bureau of Labor Statistics, he summarized the data this way, saying that in the United States, there are approximately 12 million companies or firms. Of those, about 600,000 firms are surveyed by the Bureau of Labor Statistics monthly, but to report quarterly numbers. And so of those 600,000 that are surveyed, their number said that about 68% respond to the survey results within the first month of a quarter to provide insight into hiring, to give idea around, is employment increasing, stagnant, or decreasing. They're querying a lot of things like that. One of the things that was kind of interesting is it's a very manual process. I mean, they're calling people, counterparts at these 600,000 firms in the U.S. and just manually asking them questions. How many people do you have on payroll? How many hours were logged in the prior pay period and stuff like that. But what happens is, so they get this first wave of, roughly 68% that respond within the first month, but then they get additional information that trickles in the following 2 months. And so that's the reason or the cause for the revisions to the numbers of, well, initially our data said this, but as we got, more than the 68 initial respondents, sometimes there will be a trend that will emerge. One of the points that came up is that a lot of times it's the smaller businesses that are the kind of the laggard responders. And so if there's an issue in the economy that's affecting small business, that shows up in these revisions kind of in a more pronounced way, because they tend to be the ones that are, have fewer resources to be responding to these survey questionnaires when they when they get made. It's interesting to see how manual the process is, and it really is kind of lagging data and information as as you understand when they're calling and over what time periods they're actually reporting.
It is, Jeff. Yeah, it really is, and we even kind of fell into some recordings of the phone calls that are made by these employees at the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and BLS we'll call it here, but as friendly and casual as you might imagine, but also would be shocked to hear. It's like, oh, hey, Sue. Yeah, I know we talked last week. Oh, you went from 79 to 80 employees. You added an employee. Congratulations. Talk to you next week, or next month. I mean, it's just just very casual in how I would think these things would happen in the 70s and 80s, maybe. But pretty surprised to see that they happen that way now. Pretty cool too that it's straight boots on the ground relayed information in aggregates. Interesting to see.
Yeah, it really is. One of the things that did strike me in this process was how manual and kind of, like you said, like 70s or 80s era of like data collection and how it hasn't been updated. I mean, frankly, there's probably a business opportunity for somebody to automate this process. I mean, like the information already resides within the companies, to be able to aggregate it and then, report it in a way that was much more real time and much less like labor and manual intensive would make a lot of sense. I'm kind of surprised that there hasn't been that innovation, but I think that's one of the tendencies in a government operation. And then the BLS is a government entity. I don't know that there's an incentive to innovate around just the data collection piece here, but one of the takeaways, though, I mean, given how manual the process was, or one of the counters to Trump's claim of like rigging the information, is there are so many civil servants involved in this data collection, like manually day in and day out, that if there was some effort to try to rig the numbers or the results or the outcome, it would be really, really hard to keep that under wraps and for it not to surface in some way. Now, you can take that argument for what it's worth. I don't know the truth of the matter, to be honest with you, Mark, but it was an interesting perspective on the manual nature of the data collection, maybe being a way to preserve the integrity of the data. It's not just a data scientist tweaking numbers on from data that's collected in an automated way. Maybe that's a feature and not a bug in this process if you think about it from a data security or integrity perspective, but I don't really know, to be honest.
Well, Trump is going to Trump, and he made this political to about the most extreme degree someone could, and I'm sure that satisfied whatever headline attention he was trying to get, but it seems to me that it does overshadow the real issue. I mean, there's multiple issues at hand with what I see. It's like, why on earth are we doing this manual? Doge comes to mind here, not in just cutting employees to save money, but a principal area that Doge was looking at was all the antiquated software systems. And I think I saw that the U.S. hired a chief systems, like computer systems executive for the United States or something, to look at all of our systems. And I think this would have to be one example. The BLS interviews or data they were putting out was saying that, well, it's hard for us to really get all these responses accumulated because, we've only received a 10% budget increase, inflation adjusted. So it's more than 10%. And, the only way that they see it is that I got to throw more people at the current system to solve the problem, when it's pretty clear that there are umpteen better solutions, especially when the result is what it is, which is the first round. I mean, it is clear that the BLS and those many that use this data, like major lending institutions and that sort of thing, they want inaccurate data today. And I say inaccurate, it's just not complete. So it is inaccurate because it isn't complete. They want inaccurate data today, knowing that it's going to change and why it's going to change and how. So maybe there's a use to that, but it does seem like the first round or the first month that they release these things, it's a 90% confidence interval with plus or minus 136,000 jobs. Well, I mean, the dang jobs report will show 180,000 jobs. So it's like 100% being off. I mean, it's just enormous. And then you have these enormous revisions down to virtually zero with what seems to be happening these days. I don't know how that's useful for a lot of people. So there just has to be a better way to do it. It seems to me.
There definitely has to be, and it would make sense to modernize the process and really, hone in on a real time, like data ticker or something. We certainly, the technology, the capability exists. Is there the motive and the incentive to do it? Probably not in the current, structure, the way that the BLS is set up and the way that it's operated. But it was interesting, in this antiquated system or way of collecting information. One of the people that we listened to interviewed had said, look, we'd rather have basically the monthly print, knowing that it's not complete and therefore not as accurate as it's going to be, and expecting revisions, than simply waiting for a quarterly drop of the data and not having at least the somewhat directional insight that the more frequent drops prevent or provide. So I understand, and that was helpful perspective for me, that they'd rather have data and try to put it in its proper context than have it released very infrequently, like on a quarterly basis. But the nature of the incomplete data that is still reported as jobs increased or decreased or whatever the trend was, that then gets revised, does call into question, or at least I can see where the questions come into, is this real? Why is it off so much? Should it be relied on, or how much reliance should you really put on it? And it's lagging. You want to know what's happening in the economy today, and this data is telling you what was happening 2 and 3 months ago. And so it definitely helps to better understand what those numbers mean and where they come from, and not just assume, well, this is the number, so that must be what's happening today, because that's probably really not what it's reflecting.
I think that's right. I no doubt these numbers are missing a necessary public understanding of, especially when they're making like yahoo.com headlines, and right now where the economy is in trouble, you got a lot of lay people that are reading these headlines, and nobody understands the depth of collection, how it is supposed to change, why it's changing, and all those sorts of things. And so that's missing from all of this. And to the lender that wants the data now, knowing that it's kind of inaccurate or incomplete, it makes me think that maybe we should be pitching to our lenders that our appraised value is good right now, but if a few sales occur, we'd like to revise that value so that they don't have it in hand there.
Not a bad idea, but interesting, context or perspective is, you look at the value on a specific date, and reserving the right to change your mind down the road, would, I think most appraisers would probably welcome. But these are a snapshot. The appraisal is, this data around the labor statistics is kind of a moving target, like an ever evolving type of thing, because you're trying to keep up to date with what's happening in the economy day in and day out. And people can point to their Zestimate on Zillow or whatever, and say, well, maybe it's accurate, maybe it's not, but it's an effort to try to provide real-time information, and in doing that, you do sacrifice a certain level of accuracy, I think.
Yeah, I imagine these folks are assessing a rate of change sort of analysis, so like a second or third degree order of data analysis on these things. But I mean, one of these months, I don't have the exact numbers, but it's something like 214,000 new jobs, and then 45, 60 days later, revised down to 16,000. Like, how on earth is that useful to anybody? I just can't imagine. And it's not like it's consistent. You can't drop it by 90% every time. So I don't know. It's beyond me. And so what I did see, while Antoni would need to be confirmed, so we've got a ways to go before we get there. If you take some of his public comment, he thinks that the BLS processes are antiquated. I think he and I are in agreement there. And suggested maybe only posting quarterly. It's not a real-time read, but it, in my mind, it feels like put out data that's reliable. So that makes some sense to me, because you have some time to process it, and to use the basis of it of people that are already collecting this type of stuff, which are state government unemployment insurance departments, and that'll give you I think a much easier set of data that's already being collected. So I think that was one of the ideas that was coming there. So I'll be interested to see what sort of shifts we have coming from BLS.
Yeah, I'm definitely interested in that last part too, Mark, is does the new commissioner implement significant changes in the process and even the data release? I mean, I think you just, in this fast-paced world, I think quarterly data gets stale very quickly from like a lot of market participants' perspectives. And I understand the desire to have something more frequent and more up to date, even if it's less accurate or precise. And I don't know which is right. I mean, because like you said, information that isn't right, is it really that helpful? Is it even potentially more harmful than helpful? Probably. But it'll be fun to see where the BLS goes and are there significant changes or not. But certainly a new perspective on what's being done and how it's being done is probably welcomed in the 21st century.
Very good. Well, Jeff, we can close out with a short housing analysis here. The overall market, I think rates today are sitting at about 6.51 as we're recording. We've seen a slight uptick in purchase applications. I think I saw in Redfin 519,000 more sellers than buyers. So it is certainly a buyer's market. I think I saw a Redfin economist suggest that this is the best buyer's market since 2008. And so that shift has really begun happening here. It's not the shift in price and the shift in softness from that seller's market and the total transition to buyers. And we've talked about builders struggling to move inventory here, but also able to reach down wherever they need to reach down to make sales happen. What do you got showing on the screen for us here?
Yeah, you bet. So, maybe we ought to just dedicate this episode to our friend Frank. I think he had shared this with us as well, if I remember correctly. But yeah, we talked a lot last week, so we won't dive too deeply into this. But we got a marketing piece from Lennar Homes, basically showing their promotional loan programs with a temporary FHA buy down available. Showing various interest rates from 1.25%, 2.25%, 3.25%, 4.25%. APRs listed at 4.99%. For the first year, second year, third year, they're finding creative ways to make the housing more affordable, not in dropping the price, but in providing financing incentives that make the monthly payment easier to swallow in the first couple of years. Allowing people to get in and basically move the inventory that they talked about. As I was talking offline with one of my brothers, the one that sells a lot of real estate, he was saying, look, a lot of the big guys own not just the construction company, but the mortgage company too. And they need throughput, they need transactions and just volume happening. And so, if they don't make as much or don't make anything on a mortgage transaction, they're still making money by selling the home and feeding their suppliers. And some, I think, have ownership in like various levels of supply chain as well. So it just made sense that there's a lot of incentive beyond just simply selling and moving home inventory for them to keep the, the process flowing. And so it's just another example of the creative financing that's available to help people get into and afford the house that they might not otherwise if the only option on the table is whatever the conventional market or FHA market is providing, without some of these kind of incentives and willingness on the part of the home builders to provide some level of concession to improve the financing terms for the buyers.
Well, 50,000 price reductions, 3-year buy downs, and it looks like rest of loan term buy downs as well. Move-in ready appliance packages, and they're throwing everything and the kitchen sink at you to get you to close the deal, and it makes sense. And it's not lost on me that vertical stack element is a real survivability feature of a lot of companies, and not everybody has been this way, but a lot of folks have outsourced everything they can outsource to third parties, and that's been a real trend inward now, where folks like this are doing this, and is a great example of that sort of vertical stack really making a difference in getting deals done in a tough time.
Yeah, absolutely. I think they include the kitchen sink, but they are throwing the refrigerator, washer, and dryer at you, which most builders aren't including initially. But just the extent to which they're going to move homes and make it an attractive option. And, one of the other benefits that you just kind of take for granted, but I don't know what buyer wouldn't prefer a new home over a used existing home, if the pricing is otherwise similar. I think my dad has quoted my mom multiple times as saying her favorite color is new, which I think probably resonates with a lot of people out there if given the choice.
Amen. This is not a Lennar advertisement, but here we are.
That's right. We'll hit them up to sponsor us, maybe.
Yeah, you bet. You bet. Well, Jeff, good to be here with you again for episode 56. Looking forward to getting together next week.
We'll keep going. Appreciate it, Mark.
All right. Take care.